I never expected to see my ex-husband standing at the foot of my hospital bed while I was in labor. Especially not after he divorced me because his mother was convinced a woman like me could never give him a child. But there he was, 17 inches the morning. St. Mary's Hospital in Aldershot, Hampshire, and I was about to have the baby he didn't even know existed. The contraction hit so hard I grabbed the bed rail and nearly crushed my own fingers. "Alara, breathe." Fiona's voice cut through the pain. I tried. Really, I did. But breathing felt like a luxury at that point. My blood pressure monitor kept beeping. Nurses moved in and out of the room. The fluorescent lights overhead seemed way too bright for the middle of the night. A young nurse named Rachel checked another monitor and frowned. "Doctor should be here any second." I barely heard her. All I could think about was getting through the next contraction. And then the door opened. I looked up. For a second, I honestly thought I was hallucinating. Caspian, my ex-husband, stopped dead in the doorway. The color drained from his face so fast it was almost impressive. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The room felt frozen. Then Fiona broke the silence. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me." Caspian stared at me. I stared back. 7 months. That was how long it had been since our divorce became final. 7 months since I walked out of the house we'd shared. 7 months since he chose his mother's opinion over our marriage. And now he was standing in my delivery room. A nurse appeared behind him. "Dr. Thorne." Caspian didn't answer. The nurse glanced between us. "You okay?" "No," he said quietly. That made 2 of us. Another contraction slammed into me. I groaned and squeezed the rails. Professional instincts finally kicked in. Caspian stepped forward. "What are her vitals?" The nurse handed him the chart. "Blood pressure keeps climbing." Baby's heart rate dipped twice. Caspian's expression changed instantly. Doctor mode. The same expression I used to admire. Focused, calm, efficient. For a second, I hated that it still made me feel safe. He looked at the monitor, then at me. "How long have you been having contractions?" "About 6 hours. His eyes narrowed. "You waited 6 hours. Fiona folded her arms. She didn't wait, she was trying not to be dramatic. I laughed despite myself. Then another contraction hit and reminded me life wasn't funny. Caspian examined the chart again. His jaw tightened. 37 weeks. I nodded. Yep. His eyes lifted slowly. 37 weeks. I could practically see the math happening in his head. He swallowed hard. "Alara, don't." The room went quiet again. I knew exactly what he was thinking. Exactly what he wanted to ask. But I wasn't discussing paternity while a human being was actively trying to exit my body. The nurse interrupted. "We need to make a decision." Caspian looked back at the monitor. The baby's heart rate dipped again. A tiny alarm sounded. Everything changed. The personal drama disappeared. For the next 20 minutes, he wasn't my ex-husband. He was my doctor and my son's doctor. I watched him move around the room giving instructions. His voice was steady, confident. The same voice that had once talked me through a panic attack after a difficult deployment. The same voice that had promised me we'd grow old together. Funny how life works. Sometimes the people who save you are the same people who break your heart. The labor got harder. A lot harder. At one point, I thought I might pass out. Sweat soaked my hair. My back felt like it was splitting apart. Fiona never left my side. She held my hand, fed me ice chips, threatened anyone who looked at me funny. At one point, she leaned close and whispered, "If you die, I'm haunting everybody in this room." I laughed, then cried, then laughed again. Child is weird. Hours blurred together. The sky outside the window slowly turned gray. Dawn was coming, and so was my son. Finally, Rachel checked me again. Her face lit up. "Okay," she smiled. "It's time." The room suddenly got busy. Everyone moved faster. Machines beeped. Instructions flew back and forth. And then it happened. One final push. A sharp cry filled the room. The most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. Everything stopped. Every fear, every hurt, every lonely night. For one perfect moment, none of it mattered. My son was here. I started crying immediately. Ugly crying. No dignity whatsoever. Fiona was crying too. Even Rachel looked emotional. Caspian picked up the baby. For a second, he simply stared. Then, he carefully wrapped him in a blanket. I saw his expression change. Something hit him hard. He looked at the baby's face, then looked again. The same gray-blue eyes, the same dimple in his chin, the same features Caspian saw every morning in the mirror. His hands trembled just slightly, but I noticed. Caspian walked over slowly. He handed me my son. I held him against my chest. The baby settled almost immediately, like he already knew where he belonged. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Caspian finally did, his voice barely above a whisper. Alara, I didn't look up. Don't. Please. I closed my eyes because I knew what was coming and because part of me still hated that hearing pain in his voice affected me. The room had mostly cleared out. Only Fiona remained nearby, watching, waiting, protective as ever. Caspian swallowed again. Then he asked the question. The question that had been living in his eyes since the second he walked into the room. Is he mine? The room felt silent. My son slept peacefully against my chest, completely unaware that his entire future had just shifted. I looked down at him. Tiny fingers, tiny nose, tiny heartbeat. The best thing that had ever happened to me. Then I finally looked at Caspian, the man who should have been beside me through every doctor's appointment, every ultrasound, every sleepless night. Instead, he'd been somewhere else. Believing I couldn't give him a family, I held his gaze. This is not the place. His eyes filled with something that looked a lot like regret. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. At that moment, I honestly didn't care, because for the first time in a very long time, my life wasn't about Caspian Thorne. It wasn't about his mother. It wasn't about proving anything to anybody. It was about the little boy sleeping in my arms. Caspian stared at him again. His face turned pale, almost gray. Finally, he whispered, "That's my son." I adjusted the blanket around Elias. Then I met his eyes one last time. No. My voice was calm, steady, stronger than I felt. He's my son. I let the words settle, then added, whether you become his father is a completely different question. I spent most of my adult life believing that if something was broken, you fixed it. That mindset worked pretty well in the army. Truck breaks down, fix it. Supply route gets disrupted. Find another one. Mission goes sideways. Adapt and keep moving. Marriage, as it turns out, doesn't always work that way. Sometimes you're the only one trying to repair it, and eventually you realize you're rebuilding a house while the other person quietly walks away. Looking back, I can't tell you exactly when my marriage started dying. I can tell you when I noticed. It wasn't during a fight. It wasn't during the divorce. It wasn't even when Caspian stopped defending me. It was a Sunday afternoon in Aldershot, and I was standing in a Tesco car park holding a pregnancy test I couldn't bring myself to take. But I'm getting ahead of myself. When I met Caspian Thorne, I was 34 years old. He was 37. We met at a Veterans Health fundraiser near London. I was there representing a military family support program. He was volunteering through a medical outreach group. Everybody liked Caspian. Honestly, I did too. He was kind without being fake, smart without constantly reminding everyone. And unlike a lot of men I met after deployments, he wasn't intimidated by a woman who could change a tire faster than he could. Our first date lasted 4 hours. Our second lasted 6. 8 months later, we got married. The first year was good, not perfect, but real. We bought a small house outside Aldershot, spent weekends working in the garden, argued about paint colors, watched football, fell asleep on the sofa. Normal things, the kind of things people miss after they're gone. When we decided to have a baby, neither of us expected it to take long. I was healthy, active, still serving. Caspian was a doctor. We figured nature would eventually do what nature does. A few months passed, then a year, then 2, then 3, and every month felt a little heavier than the one before. At first, people left us alone. Then the questions started. The questions always start. When are you two having kids? You'd make such great parents. What are you waiting for? Nobody means harm. Most people think they're making conversation. But after a while, every question feels like a spotlight, especially when you don't have an answer. I started tracking everything. Temperature charts, ovulation windows, nutrition plans, doctor appointments, vitamins. I could have organized a military operation with less paperwork. When my doctor suggested fertility testing, I agreed immediately. No hesitation, no excuses. I wanted answers. The results came back normal. I remember staring at the report in the car park afterward, relieved, confused, hopeful. I called Caspian from my car. "Everything looks good. That's great. You should schedule yours." A pause. Yeah, that was the first delay. There would be many more. Weeks became months. Every time I asked, something came up. Work, patients, scheduling conflicts, insurance paperwork. The excuses changed. The outcome never did. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I wish I had. Then there was Lavinia, my mother-in-law, the woman who could insult you while sounding like she was offering prayer. The first time we met, she hugged me and smiled. "Oh, a military woman." I smiled back. "Yes, ma'am. Well, that's certainly different." Different? That word followed me for years. Everything about me was different. Different from what she wanted. Different from Arabella Hayes. Different from the daughters-in-law she imagined while sitting in church every Sunday. Arabella was a nurse practitioner, polished, always perfectly dressed. The woman Lavinia had wanted Caspian to marry before I came along. To Arabella's credit, she never did anything wrong. She was always polite, always respectful. The problem wasn't Arabella. The problem was that Lavinia treated her like a comparison chart. And somehow I always lost. One Sunday after church, we were eating lunch at Lavinia's house. Roast chicken, vegetables, Yorkshire puddings, tea, the usual. Arabella happened to stop by because she'd been helping organize a church fundraiser. Lavinia lit up the second she walked through the door. "Arabella has such a gift with children." Arabella laughed. "I just babysit sometimes." "No, dear. Some women are natural mothers." The table got quiet, not completely silent. Just enough. Enough for everyone to know exactly who wasn't included in that category. Arabella looked uncomfortable. Caspian stared at his plate. "I took a sip of tea. That's interesting." Lavinia smiled. "What is?" "You've never actually seen Arabella raise a child." The smile tightened slightly. "I can just tell." I nodded. "Must be nice having that superpower." Fiona later told me I should have charged admission for that conversation. Unfortunately, sarcasm wasn't enough to stop what came next. Because over time, Lavinia got bolder, not openly cruel. That would have been easier. Instead, she became concerned. Concerned people can be dangerous. Concerned sounds reasonable. Concerned sounds loving. Concern gives cruelty a disguise. One afternoon, she visited our house while Caspian was at work. I was planting flowers near the porch. My knees already hurt from years of military service. I stood up slowly. She noticed. Of course, she noticed. "Oh, honey, that tone. Every military spouse knows that tone. Your knee again. A little." She frowned. "That's a shame." I went back to digging. Then came the next sentence. The real sentence. "Children require so much energy." I stopped. There it was. Always there. Hidden inside every conversation, like a splinter. "You seem worried about my knees." "I'm worried about your future." "No." I looked up. "You're worried about grandchildren?" She smiled sadly as if I were the difficult one. "I just want what's best for Caspian." I didn't answer because I was starting to realize something. She wasn't talking to me. Not really. She was building a case. And every month without a pregnancy became another piece of evidence. The hardest part wasn't Lavinia. It was Caspian. Because every time she pushed, I waited for him to push back. Every time she crossed a line, I expected him to notice. Sometimes he'd tell me not to take her seriously. Sometimes he'd say she meant well. Sometimes he'd change the subject, but he never truly stopped her. One night I finally asked him. We were washing dishes after dinner. Nothing dramatic, just dishes. Running water. Ordinary life. Caspian. Why don't you ever defend me?" He froze for half a second, then continued rinsing a plate. "I do." "No." I shook my head. "You calm me down afterward." He didn't respond. I already knew I was right. A week later, I sat alone in a Tesco car park holding another negative pregnancy test. The sun was setting. People pushed shopping trolleys through the lot. Families loaded groceries into cars. I stared at that little plastic stick and cried harder than I want to admit. Not because of the test, because I suddenly felt completely alone. The divorce didn't begin in a courtroom. It began there in that car park with tears running down my face, and the growing realization that I was carrying the weight of our disappointment by myself. I still didn't know the worst part. I still didn't know that while I was blaming my body, someone else already knew the truth. 3 weeks after my divorce became final, I passed out during a logistics briefing at Aldershot Garrison. Not my proudest moment. One second, I was standing in front of a whiteboard explaining supply delays for a training exercise. The next, I woke up flat on my back with 3 soldiers staring down at me like I'd been shot. "Ma'am," I blinked. Somebody handed me water. Another soldier looked terrified. Which honestly made sense because when an army captain suddenly collapses in the middle of a briefing room, people tend to assume the worst. "I'm fine," I muttered. I was not fine. I felt nauseous, dizzy, sweaty, and strangely emotional for someone who once reset a dislocated shoulder without crying. Fiona showed up 20 minutes later after somebody called her. She took one look at me and said, "Oh, you look awful." "Thank you. You look pregnant." I rolled my eyes. Don't start. Turns out she was right. At the military medical center, a tired doctor named Linda Chen walked into the exam room holding a tablet. She smiled gently. "Captain Voss. Yeah, you're pregnant." For a second, I honestly thought she had the wrong chart. I stared at her, then laughed once. Not happy laughter, the confused kind. "No." She looked down at the tablet again. "Your test was positive, and based on your numbers, you're several weeks along." I shook my head slowly. "That's not possible." Dr. Chen pulled up a stool. "Well, biologically speaking, it very much is." I looked down at my hands. I remember how cold they felt. I swallowed hard. We tried for years. The doctor's expression softened. Sometimes these things happen later than expected. Sometimes such a small word for something that completely changes your life. I drove home in silence afterward. Didn't turn on the radio. Didn't answer calls. Didn't even stop for coffee. I just sat in my driveway for almost an hour staring at the steering wheel while my brain tried to catch up with reality. Pregnant at 38 after the divorce. After years of believing my body had failed, I eventually picked up my phone and opened Caspian's contact. My thumb hovered over his name. I should tell him. That would have been the decent thing, the mature thing, the legal thing probably. But then another memory surfaced. Lavinia's kitchen. Sunday dinner. Her voice floating through the doorway. She's a soldier. Women like her don't have babies. And worse than her words, Caspian saying nothing. I locked my phone and tossed it onto the passenger seat. No, not yet. Maybe not ever. That night, I barely slept. I kept walking to the bathroom to look at myself in the mirror, like somehow I'd see a different person standing there. I didn't feel like a mother. I felt tired, scared, and furious. That part of me still wanted Caspian to know. The next few weeks became a blur of appointments and exhaustion. Because here's the thing. Nobody tells you when you're older and pregnant. Your body keeps score. My knees hurt constantly. My ankles swelled. I couldn't sleep through the night. I cried once because the cafe forgot my extra sauce, then cried harder because I realized I was crying about sauce. Fiona found that story hilarious. You survived deployment stress but almost lost it over condiments. I was hormonal. You threatened legal action against a 17-year-old cashier. He rolled his eyes at me. Fiona grinned. Honestly, that's fair. She became my emergency contact for everything. Appointments, pharmacy runs, late-night panic spirals. One night, she found me sitting on my kitchen floor surrounded by paperwork, medical records, insurance forms, divorce documents. What are you doing? I rubbed my forehead. Preparing for what? I don't know yet, but deep down I did know. I was protecting myself because if Caspian found out, Lavinia would eventually find out too. And the moment that happened, my pregnancy would stop being private. It would become a courtroom, a church discussion, a family argument, a reputation battle. I couldn't survive that while carrying a baby. So, I documented everything. Dates, appointments, messages, voicemails, the estimated conception timeline. I kept copies and folders like evidence for a future trial. Maybe that sounds cold. Maybe it was. But military life teaches you something important. Hope is not a strategy. A few months later, Fiona dragged me to a local cafe after an appointment. I looked terrible. My feet hurt, my back hurt, and the baby had apparently decided my bladder was his personal trampoline. We slid into a booth near the window. Fiona handed me a menu. You need protein. I need sleep. You can have eggs first. A woman approached our table carrying coffee, mid-50s, brown ponytail, friendly face. Fiona smiled. Alara, this is Nora. The woman nodded politely. You served with Fiona. Unfortunately, I said. Nora laughed softly. Then her expression shifted slightly when she heard my last name. Thorne. I immediately stiffened. It was automatic at that point, Nora noticed. I'm sorry. I used to work at a men's health clinic over in London. I said nothing. She looked uncomfortable. I probably shouldn't even mention this. Fiona leaned forward slightly. What? Nora lowered her voice. I remember Dr. Caspian Thorne coming in a couple years ago. The room suddenly felt smaller. I kept my face neutral. For what? Nora shook her head quickly. I can't discuss private medical information, then don't. But she still looked at me carefully. If your solicitor ever starts asking questions during custody proceedings, she paused. Make sure they ask the right ones. My stomach dropped. Fiona understood immediately. I could see it on her face. Nora stood awkwardly. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said anything. Then she walked away. For several seconds, neither Fiona nor I spoke. The waitress refilled our coffee. Music played softly overhead. Some old couple argued lovingly about breakfast nearby. Normal life continued around me while my entire world tilted sideways. Finally, Fiona spoke quietly. Alara. I stared at the table. He knew. We don't know that. I looked up sharply. No, don't do that. Do what? Don't soften it. Fiona exhaled slowly. Because she knew. Same as me. If Caspian had gone to a fertility clinic before the divorce, then he had known there might be a problem on his side. And he still let me carry all the shame. I suddenly felt sick. Actually sick. I pushed out of the booth and barely made it to the bathroom before throwing up. Pregnancy nausea had nothing to do with it. I leaned over the sink afterward, shaking. Not crying yet, just shaking. When I came back, Fiona was waiting quietly. Neither of us joked anymore. I need a solicitor, I said. Fiona nodded once. Okay. And I need to stop thinking like his ex-wife. She tilted her head. What does that mean? I picked up my purse slowly. It means from now on I think like Elias's mother. That was the moment everything changed. Not because I stopped loving Caspian completely. Honestly, part of me still did. That was the humiliating part. No, what changed was simpler than that. I stopped waiting for somebody else to protect me. The first 24 hours after Elias was born felt like a strange dream. Not the good kind. The kind where familiar faces keep showing up in places they don't belong. I barely slept. Every time Elias made a sound, I woke up. Every time a nurse opened the door, I looked up. Partly because I was a new mother. Partly because I knew Caspian was somewhere in the building, and I knew he wasn't going to let this go. The morning after the delivery, sunlight spilled through the hospital window. Elias was sleeping in the bassinet beside me. I was staring at him when a soft knock came at the door. I didn't even need to look. I knew. Come in. Caspian stepped inside. For a second, neither of us spoke. He looked exhausted, not hospital shift exhausted. Life exhausted. His tie was gone. His sleeves were rolled up. There was stubble on his face. I'd never seen him look older. He glanced at Elias, then at me. How are you feeling? Tired. That's fair. The silence stretched. Finally, he pulled a chair closer. I filed the conflict report. I frowned. The what? The hospital requires documentation when a physician treats a close family member. Of course, I'd almost forgotten. The hospital administration had already spoken to him after the delivery. Not because he'd done anything wrong. The emergency had justified his involvement. But procedures were procedures. Everything had to be documented. Funny documentation again. My entire life seemed to revolve around paperwork lately. Caspian rubbed the back of his neck. They'll review everything. Okay. They'll probably determine I acted appropriately. Okay. His jaw tightened slightly. You don't have anything else to say? I looked at him. What exactly are you hoping for here? His eyes dropped. That answer hurt more than if I'd yelled. Because deep down he knew he hadn't earned much from me. Not yet. Maybe not ever. He looked toward Elias again. The baby stirred slightly. One tiny hand escaped the blanket. Caspian stared at those tiny fingers like they were made of glass. I still can't believe it. I folded my arms. Believe what? That he's here. A bitter laugh escaped before I could stop it. Well, somebody believed I couldn't have children. His face flinched. Good. Not because I enjoyed hurting him, but because I was tired of carrying all the pain myself. For years I'd been the only one bleeding emotionally. Now he finally had to sit with some of it. A nurse knocked and entered before either of us could continue. She checked my vitals, adjusted a monitor, made small talk. Normal hospital stuff. The interruption felt almost merciful because neither Caspian nor I seemed capable of having a simple conversation anymore. Everything carried history. Every sentence dragged years behind it. After the nurse left, he stood. "I want a DNA test." There it was, straight to business. No surprise. I nodded. "Okay." His eyebrows lifted. "Okay," through solicitors. The relief on his face lasted maybe half a second, then it vanished. "Alara, no." He sighed. "We can handle this privately." I laughed. Actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was ridiculous. "Privately?" His expression hardened. "I mean, without lawyers." "Quiet is how we got here." "That's not fair." "There it is again." "What? That phrase?" I shook my head. "Every time something makes you uncomfortable, it becomes unfair." For a second, he looked like he wanted to argue. Instead, he looked away. Interesting. Very interesting, because that was the first time I'd seen genuine uncertainty in him. The kind that comes when somebody realizes the old excuses don't work anymore. A few hours later, I got my first visit from Lavinia. I would have preferred another contraction. At least contractions eventually end. The door opened. In she walked. Pearl earrings, perfect hair, church clothes, and right beside her was Arabella Hayes, of course. For one brief moment, Lavinia looked genuinely emotional. Not angry, not manipulative, just stunned. Her eyes landed on Elias, then widened. Because even at less than 2 days old, that baby looked like a thorn. The resemblance wasn't subtle. His chin alone could have settled a court case. Lavinia recovered quickly. Too quickly. Oh, that was all she said at first. Just one word. Then her social mask snapped back into place. Well, she smiled. A practiced smile. Babies can look like all sorts of people. Fiona nearly choked on her coffee. She'd arrived 20 minutes earlier and had already claimed the visitor chair like a bodyguard. "Ma'am," Fiona said, "that baby has your son's whole face." Arabella looked mortified. Honestly, I felt a little sorry for her. She always seemed trapped in Lavinia's orbit. Like a decent person who accidentally joined the wrong book club, Lavinia ignored Fiona. Her eyes stayed on me. "We should be careful about assumptions." I met her gaze. "We should have been careful about accusations, too." That landed. I could tell. Her smile tightened. "Not much. Just enough." Then she tried a different approach. The sweet voice. The concerned voice. The one that made strangers think she was kind. "Alara, sweetheart, nobody wants conflict." I almost admired the performance. Almost. "You called me infertile for 3 years." "I never said that." Fiona snorted so loudly a nurse looked into the room. "You absolutely did." Lavinia turned toward her. "I think perhaps some emotions are running high." Fiona pointed at Elias. "He has emotions. He's 48 hours old." Arabella suddenly covered her mouth. I realized she was trying not to laugh. For the first time ever, I liked her. Lavinia noticed too. Her expression darkened just slightly. Then she stood. "I think we should all wait for the DNA results." There it was, the implication, the accusation without actually making one, a speciality of hers. I felt anger rise. Real anger. Hot and immediate. But before I could respond, another voice spoke. "Caspian's." "Mum!" Everyone looked at him. He'd been standing silently near the window, watching, listening. Now he stepped forward. "Stop." The room froze. Lavinia blinked. "Caspian, no." His voice remained calm, but firmer than I'd heard in years. "Stop." For the first time since I'd known her, Lavinia actually looked surprised. Not angry. Surprised like she genuinely didn't understand why her words weren't working. She gathered her handbag, straightened her jacket, and left. Arabella followed after offering me an apologetic smile. The room felt lighter immediately. Fiona whistled. "Well?" Nobody answered. After a minute, she stood too. "I'll go get food." She pointed at Caspian. "You." Then pointed at me. "You." Then made a warning gesture. No nonsense. The second she left, silence returned. Caspian looked exhausted again. Older somehow. He sat back down, and for the first time, I saw fear. Real fear. Not fear of losing a lawsuit. Not fear of embarrassment, fear of the truth. I decided to test something. Did you know? His head lifted slowly. Know what? That there might have been a fertility issue on your side. The color drained from his face. Not completely, just enough. And in that moment, I got my answer. He knew exactly what I was asking, which meant he knew exactly why I was asking it. Caspian. He closed his eyes only for a second, but it was enough. That tiny pause told me more than any DNA test ever could. 3 months later, the DNA results arrived. The test confirmed what everybody with functioning eyesight already knew. Elias was Caspian's son, 100%. No surprises, no dramatic courtroom reveal. No hidden secrets, just facts. Cold, simple, undeniable. The bigger surprise came 2 weeks later. My solicitor, Monica Alvarez, called me on a Thursday afternoon while I was folding baby clothes in my living room. Elias was asleep in a portable bassinet beside the sofa. For once, the house was quiet. I answered on speaker. Hey Monica, got a minute? Something in her tone made me sit down. What's going on? A pause. We received the records. I already knew which records. The fertility records. The ones we'd legally requested after Caspian filed for parental rights. I looked toward Elias, suddenly afraid of what I was about to hear, and Monica exhaled slowly. Alara, Caspian underwent fertility testing nearly 9 months before the divorce. My chest tightened, even though I'd suspected it, even though I'd practically known. Hearing it out loud felt different, and he was informed there were concerns regarding sperm count and motility. I closed my eyes. There it was, the truth. The thing I'd spent years blaming myself for. The thing Lavinia had turned into a public humiliation campaign. The thing Caspian never corrected, Monica continued. There was follow-up testing recommended. Did he do it? No, of course not, because follow-up testing would have required facing reality, and reality was apparently easier to place on my shoulders. After the call ended, I sat in silence for a long time. Not crying, not yelling, just sitting. Elias eventually woke up and started fussing. I picked him up automatically, rocked him against my shoulder, and that's when the strangest thing happened. I didn't feel devastated. I felt free. For years, I'd wondered if something was wrong with me. For years, I'd carried shame that didn't belong to me. Now, I finally knew. The weight had never been mine. A week later, another invitation arrived. This one came from Grace Graham, the pastor's wife at Lavinia's church. Family Values and Community Service Night. A banquet honoring local volunteers, military families, and community leaders. I almost threw it away. Almost. Then I noticed something. Lavinia Thorne, recipient of the Women's Mentorship Award. I laughed so hard Elias startled awake. Mentorship. That was rich. Fiona came over that evening. I handed her the invitation. She read it once, then twice, then started laughing too. Oh, this is incredible. I know. Are you going? No. She looked at me. You're absolutely going. I shook my head. No chance. Alara? No, Alara. I sighed. What? Fiona pointed at the invitation. That woman spent years controlling the narrative. I said nothing because she wasn't wrong. How many people at that church still think you couldn't have children? Too many. How many think you cheated on Caspian? More than I wanted to know. Fiona folded the paper. You don't have to make a scene. I don't want a scene, I know, she smiled. But maybe it's time somebody heard the truth. The next week, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Part of me wanted to stay home, protect my peace, focus on Elias, move on. But another part remembered every Sunday lunch, every whisper, every sideways glance, every prayer request disguised as gossip. Eventually, I called Grace Graham. I'll be there. The banquet took place on a Friday evening, early October. Warm enough for short sleeves. Cool enough to remind you autumn was coming. I wore my dress uniform, not as a statement, because military families were being recognized, and because it still fit. Mostly, Elias wore a tiny blue outfit Fiona had bought him. He looked ridiculous and perfect. The church hall looked exactly like every English church hall. Long folding tables, white tablecloths, casseroles, roast dinners, tea, sheet cake, veterans sitting together near the front, church ladies discussing everybody else's business. Normal, familiar, comforting until it wasn't. The moment I walked in, conversations shifted. Not stopped, shifted. People noticed. People always notice. Lavinia spotted me within 30 seconds. Of course she did. She crossed the room wearing pearls and a smile. The smile arrived first. The warmth never did. Elara. Evening. Her eyes dropped to Elias. Then back to me. Well, look at him. I smiled politely. He does that a lot. Several nearby women laughed. Lavinia didn't. He's certainly growing. Babies tend to. The smile flickered. Just a little. Good. For years, she'd been the one making me uncomfortable. I was learning that discomfort works both ways. The evening moved along. Dinner, announcements, recognition awards, military appreciation segment. Everything remained perfectly civilized. Then Lavinia stepped to the podium and everything changed. She accepted her award with practiced humility, thanked volunteers, thanked church leadership, thanked family. Then she began talking about motherhood, womanhood, sacrifice, family values. At first, nothing sounded unusual. Then the message slowly shifted the way it always did with Lavinia. A strong family, she said, smiling at the audience, requires women willing to place home above pride. A few heads nodded. She continued, not every woman is called to motherhood. My stomach tightened. Across the room, Fiona muttered, oh no. Lavinia wasn't looking at me. That would have been too obvious. She didn't need to. Everybody knew. Some women pursue careers. Smile, recognition. Smile, status. Smile. But raising a family requires a different kind of strength. The room felt smaller, hotter, and suddenly, I was back at those Sunday dinners, back in that kitchen, back carrying blame that wasn't mine. I looked toward Caspian. He sat at one of the front tables, head lowered, silent again, just like before. And in that moment, I realized something. If I stayed quiet tonight, nothing would ever change. For a few seconds, I sat there frozen. Not because I was afraid, because I was tired. Tired in a way only people who've carried the same wound for years can understand. I looked around the church hall, the folding tables, the half-finished desserts, the church members pretending not to stare, the veterans sitting near the front, the women whispering behind paper cups of tea, and Lavinia standing proudly behind the microphone. Still smiling, still pretending, still telling a story about me without ever saying my name. Then I looked at Caspian one more time. Maybe part of me still hoped he would stand up. Maybe part of me still wanted him to do what he should have done years ago. Defend his wife, tell the truth, choose us. Instead, he stared at the table. Just like every Sunday dinner, just like every family gathering, just like every time his mother sharpened her words and pointed them at me, something inside me finally settled. Not broke, settled, the way muddy water settles after a storm. I stood up. Fiona immediately looked nervous. Not because she thought I'd make a scene, because she knew I rarely stood up unless I'd already made a decision. You okay? She whispered. I nodded. Then I walked toward the stage. The room grew quiet almost immediately. People noticed. They always do. Pastor Graham looked surprised when I approached. Captain Voss, I smiled politely. May I say something? He hesitated, then nodded. I think he sensed this wasn't going to be about military service. I took the microphone for a second. I just looked around the room. Not angry, not emotional, just honest. My name is Elara Voss. The room became completely silent. A few people shifted in their chairs. Everyone knew who I was, and everyone knew exactly why I was standing there. I've attended this church on and off for years. I paused. Some of you know me as a soldier. A few veterans nodded. Some of you know me as Dr. Caspian Thorne's ex-wife. More nodding. And some of you know me as the woman who couldn't have children. That one landed hard. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Across the room, Lavinia's smile disappeared. Finally, I continued. That story was never true. Lavinia stepped forward immediately. Elara. I raised one hand, not aggressively. Just enough. No. The room froze again. For once, she wasn't controlling the conversation. I spent years believing something was wrong with me. My voice stayed calm. Years blaming myself. I looked down briefly, then back up. I took every test my doctors recommended. Silence. I followed every instruction. More silence. I carried every ounce of shame. I glanced toward Caspian and I carried it alone. Nobody interrupted. Not even Lavinia. Because suddenly the room wasn't hearing gossip. They were hearing a person. A real one. I reached into my handbag, pulled out my phone, then looked directly at Lavinia. You once left me a voicemail. Her face turned pale. Only slightly, but enough. You probably don't remember. She remembered. I could tell. Everyone could. I do. The room remained silent. I'd like everyone else to hear it too. Pastor Graham looked uncomfortable, but he didn't stop me. I pressed play. The recording lasted less than 15 seconds. That was all it needed. Lavinia's voice filled the hall. Clear, calm, cruel. At least now Caspian can find a real woman. One who understands that a man needs children, not medals. The recording ended. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. For a moment, all you could hear was the air conditioning. Then somebody near the back whispered, "My goodness." An older veteran sitting near the front slowly shook his head. A woman beside him crossed her arms. The mood in the room shifted instantly, not because of drama, because people suddenly understood. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't concern. It wasn't love. It was cruelty dressed up as advice. Lavinia stepped forward. That recording doesn't tell the whole story. I looked at her. It tells enough. She opened her mouth again, then closed it. Because for once, there wasn't a clever response available. Not one that would survive daylight. The room waited. Then something happened I genuinely wasn't expecting. Caspian stood up slowly. The chair scraped against the floor. Every head turned toward him, including mine. For a second, I thought he might defend her. Honestly, I did. Old habits are hard to break. But then he looked directly at the audience and finally told the truth. Alara is right. The words echoed through the room. Lavinia stared at him. Caspian, no. Mum. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. I knew. The room got even quieter somehow. I knew there were fertility concerns on my side before the divorce. Gasps. Several people looked genuinely shocked, including Arabella. I was embarrassed. He swallowed hard. I was ashamed. His eyes found mine. And I let Alara take the blame. For the first time all evening, I saw tears in his eyes. Real tears, not for sympathy, not for attention. The kind people cry when they finally stopped lying to themselves. I let my mother say things that weren't true. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted because every person in that room understood exactly what confession sounds like. Lavinia looked stunned, not sad, not remorseful, stunned, like she couldn't believe she'd lost control of the story. Pastor Graham quietly stepped forward. Perhaps we should take a moment. Nobody disagreed. The event ended awkwardly after that. No shouting, no dramatic exit, just a room full of people suddenly rethinking years of assumptions. Honestly, that felt more satisfying than yelling ever could. Outside, the October air felt cool against my skin. Fiona stood beside me holding Elias. People slowly filtered into the car park. Conversation started. Whispers traveled. Truth works fast once it's finally released. A few minutes later, Caspian came outside. I wasn't surprised. He stopped a few feet away. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he looked at Elias. Then at me. I'm sorry. Simple words. Years late, but sincere. I believed he meant them. That didn't change anything. I'm sorry, too. He looked confused. For what? I adjusted Elias's blanket. For spending so many years asking people to see my worth. The truth hit me as I said it. I wasn't angry anymore. Not really. I was done. And being done feels different than being bitter. Caspian took a breath. Is there any chance we can start over? I smiled sadly. There it was. The question everybody expected. The question every revenge story usually ends with. The grand reunion, the second chance, the happy ending. But life isn't a fairy tale, and some damage changes the shape of things forever. No, the answer came easily. Not because I hated him, because I didn't. That was the surprising part. I just understood something now that I didn't understand before. Love isn't enough. Respect matters. Trust matters. Character matters. And once those things are broken, saying sorry is only the beginning, not the finish line. Caspian lowered his eyes. I think he already knew. What do I do now? I looked at Elias, sleeping peacefully in Fiona's arms, then back at Caspian. Be a father. He nodded. Okay. Consistently. Another nod. Okay. Not when it's convenient, I understand. I believed him. For the first time in years, I actually believed him. Months passed, then more. Life slowly became ordinary again. The best kind of ordinary. Midnight feedings, doctor appointments, laundry, bills, coffee, work, Elias's first laugh, his first tooth, his first attempt to eat a crayon, the important things. Caspian kept showing up, not perfectly, but consistently. Parenting classes, visitations, child support, birthday parties, doctor visits, the work, the real work. Lavinia wasn't allowed unsupervised access. That boundary stayed firmly in place, and eventually people stopped talking about the scandal. Small towns always move on to fresher gossip. But I never forgot the lesson because revenge wasn't what saved me. Truth did. Boundaries did. Self-respect did. The real victory wasn't exposing Lavinia. It wasn't humiliating Caspian. It wasn't proving I could have a child. The real victory was refusing to let somebody else's lie become my son's inheritance. Today, Elias is thriving. I'm still in Hampshire, still serving, still laughing with Fiona over terrible cafe coffee. My knees still hurt when it rains. I still don't trust easily. And some mornings I still catch myself grieving the marriage I thought I had. But grief and peace can exist in the same heart. I've learned that people think revenge is loud. Sometimes it is. But the kind that changed my life looked a lot quieter. It looked like legal documents, doctor appointments, saying no without feeling guilty. Walking away from people who demanded access to me. Choosing peace over approval. Caspian occasionally asks if I'll ever fully forgive him. Maybe I will. Maybe I already have. Forgiveness and reconciliation aren't the same thing. I learned that too. What matters is this. My son will grow up knowing he never had to earn love, and neither did his mother. If this story stayed with you, I'd love to know what you would have done in my place. Would you have told Caspian about the pregnancy right away or waited until you felt safe? And if you've ever had to rebuild your life after betrayal, I hope you remember something important. Surviving it was never a weakness.